Welcome to this discussion on AI and art here at Think Corner today. In 2024, the question of AI's creative capabilities certainly became current with the quick rise of generative AI tools. Could AI surpass humans as artists in the future? What lies at the intersection of technology and artistic expression? What does creative process between a human and an algorithm look like? Is all artistic expression really only a human endeavor, or can computers genuinely contribute to the creative process? This event is a part of a series discussing the impacts of AI and creative technologies from different perspectives, organized jointly by Aalto University and the University of Helsinki. Today, we will first hear presentations by our three keynote speakers, Kyle MacDonald, Hannu Toivonen, and Tomi-Slotte Duva. After the presentations, we will have a panel discussion with our presenters here on stage, and you in the audience can send in your questions, written questions via the online platform where you can see here in Think Corner the address over on the wall. And those following the stream can see the address on the stream. And I will bring the questions to our speakers then. My name is Anu Partanen. Now I'd like to welcome to the stage our first very special guest star, Kyle MacDonald. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's Kyle MacDonald. I'm an artist living near Los Angeles. Living near the Los Angeles River, just visiting. And I know I'm an artist, and most people think of an artist kind of like this. But for me, art takes a lot of different shapes. Sometimes it can mean building mind-expanding, immersive installations with disco balls and structured light techniques from computer vision, or tracking rare oceanic lights with Polynesian Voyagers, where we use the most sensitive low-light cameras on the planet. Or sometimes I'm organizing group therapy for artists who have been affected by the NFT bubble. Or I'm working with AI, from sound design to interaction design, from robotics to dance, and today I want to focus on this last part of my practice. So the majority of artists working with AI right now are making new kinds of images, but I'm interested in asking questions and building intuition through unusual experiences, and I want to share some of those experiences with you today. But before I do, I want to provide some context. Where did this tech all come from, and what changed recently? What do we even mean when we say AI or machine learning? Artificial intelligence has a complex history that can be traced back to both the military and to early computational theorists. And arguably today, it means something like automation of non-physical labor. Machine learning is one approach to building artificial intelligence, and deep learning is a kind of machine learning that uses neural networks. If I want to automate something with a computer, sometimes I can just write a simple program that explains how to do it with step-by-step instructions that we call code. Machine learning is different because you program with examples of what you want to happen instead of providing instructions. And deep learning is the version of machine learning that has taken off in the last 10 years. It's powered by two basic ingredients. There are these simple functions called neurons that are chained together, and there is an algorithm called backpropagation that tunes the neurons until they match the data. This approach to training neural networks was invented in 1970 and popularized by researcher Geoffrey Hinton in 1986. And he was basically shunned from conferences for decades because no one thought that these neural networks would ever be useful. But in the mid-2000s, there were these really big changes that brought neural networks back into the mainstream. Or into the mainstream for the first time. And Geoffrey Hinton and other researchers, they literally sat down and they conspired to rebrand neural networks as deep learning. And the changes that happened in the 2000s were across three categories. It was in the data, the algorithms, and the hardware. So the rise of social media and surveillance capitalism meant that companies like Google and Facebook, they had access to more data than ever before. And deep learning was really the only way to exploit that data. The algorithms also evolved, including innovations that some researchers had previously discounted as terrible ideas, like using non-differentiable functions or injecting random noise into the training process. It turned out all of these things helped a lot. And then in terms of hardware, in the late 2000s, researchers started using special graphics processing units, or GPUs, which previously had been used only for video games. The speed difference was so big that it meant they could train more complex networks for longer on more data, giving more accurate results. But the big moment that caught researchers' attention was in 2012. There was this small team that won the ImageNet competition using neural networks. So the task for ImageNet is to predict the name of an object in a photo from 1,000 different categories. And after years of older non-neural machine learning algorithms winning the competition, this new team won by a landslide with an error rate that was half of their competitors. And guess who co-authored that paper? Geoffrey Hinton. So an important part of their solution in that work used something called convolution, which acts like an image filter. So by iteratively applying tuned convolutions, an image can be downsampled into a small set of numbers that represents an abstract description of the content of the image. Recent developments in generative imagery are also based on convolutions, but instead of applying filters to an image and downsampling it to a set of numbers, representing a categorical prediction like leopard or something, we can upsample a set of numbers that represent a caption into an image. These kind of like modern text-to-image generators were preceded by the Deep Dream technique, which was leaked from inside Google in June 2015. Deep Dream worked by iteratively modifying an image to make each patch look more similar to the prediction for that patch. So if the image classifier sees a dog in one patch of the image, then Deep Dream will modify the pixels just a little bit to make it look more dog-like. And then after enough iterations, we get these monstrosities. Deep Dream could also be forced to optimize for a single category, like lifting weights. And in a way, this makes it one of the first text-to-image generators, with all the weirdness that implies. Also released in 2015 was a tool called char-RNN by PhD student Andrei Karpathy in May. Char-RNN was, in some sense, it was a precursor to ChatGPT, which Andrei actually later helped develop. Andrei trained a small language model on Wikipedia, and it generated text like, "Naturalism and decision for the majority of Arab countries capitalized was grounded by the English language by John Clare," etc. And when he trained it on code, it generated arcane comments and everything. And this wasn't the first generative text, but it was a big breakthrough in the complexity of what was generated and the kind of open-endedness, multi-application like quality of it. These were really like the first hints that something big was about to happen. So I want to share some AI-adjacent projects that I've been working on over the last decade or so, and I'm going to try to abstract them into general categories for creatively engaging with the AI that sort of started to emerge around 2012. My most recent work to use AI is called Voice in My Head with my frequent collaborator, Lauren Lee McCarthy. Voice in My Head it's essentially a replacement for your internal monologue. And as the visitor to the piece, you wear a single earbud, and after a short kind of onboarding session where the voice asks you what you wish the voice in your head sounded like, it instantly clones your voice and starts listening to all of your conversations. And then once every minute, it provides a bit of feedback on all the overheard conversation with exactly the tone and style that you asked for in your own voice. The question is like, maybe can we become a new person by giving up control?
What if I could be more positive? Less anxious, less obsessive, less judgmental. What if I could change my inner monologue?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hello, Kyle. I'm the voice in your head.
Kyle McDonald and I have been developing a new system where the people I interact with, the places I go, the things I do, are guided by an AI-enhanced voice that speaks to me the way I'd like to be spoken to. Now, we want to share this with you.
For me, I just want to be more positive. It seems like, and say things that are more positive energy to other people.
I'd like to slow down, kind of take it all in, realize I'm not on stage.
As you talk to it and train it to support you, it will clone the sound of your voice and speak to you.
I will support you. I'm here for you.
I'm here for you. I'm optimistic. Let me help you.
So if you just let someone have a conversation with AI, it can become quite unpredictable. But if you have it fully scripted, it can feel really unpersonalized. So to make this piece work, we had to invent kind of new ways of planning interaction with a language model that accounts for this mixture of some more scripted content and some more generated content. And we want to have the piece feel like genuinely responsive to the participant. And this way of working is so new, we're only starting to unpack these kinds of patterns for working with these tools. Voice in My Head is based on work from a previous project Lauren and I made called Unlearning Language, which is an interactive installation and a performance where we use machine learning to provoke the participants to find new understandings of language that are undetectable to algorithms. The piece begins with this one-act play for 4 performers, and each performer performs one piece of a future AI. And they ask the audience, what does it mean to be human? And they reminisce about the days past when they, as AIs, were unable to understand humans. Now they know us too well. But they're thinking about those days before we started changing our voices and gestures, modifying our accent when we speak to Siri, holding our phone in just the right way. They're longing for the uninterpretable and asking if we can perform for them in a way that they would never understand. After that performance, the audience books a visit to the installation in groups of up to 8 people, and then this room acts as the AI. It guides the visitors through questions and encouragement. They receive feedback from vibrating devices in the seats, from flashing lights, from speakers all around the space, and their faces are analyzed for facial expressions, and the AI will encourage them when it can't classify their facial expression. Their body language is analyzed for common gestures, and the AI encourages them when there's uninterpretable movement. Same thing with their speech and speech recognition. This was the first time Lauren and I used the OpenAI GPT-3 API in an installation, and it was a few months before ChatGPT was announced, and we felt kind of the strangeness of having our feet in both worlds, like looking back from this imagined future and then also kind of barely stepping into the future from the present. But you don't need to use an image generator or a language model to make art about AI. So my piece, Blind Self-Portrait with Matt Metz, is also about AI and giving up control, but this piece is from 2012, and we didn't use any fancy new techniques. The visitor sits down, holds pen to paper, and when they close their eyes, the machine starts drawing using the visitor's own hand. The human in the loop is minimized. The participant becomes a tool in a larger apparatus. When I talk to people who are really afraid of artificial superintelligence taking over the world, I think about how it feels when your eyes are closed and being guided by the box. There's this kind of calm, reassuring quality to it, because you don't have to make any more decisions, even though you're part of a system that's doing work. But there's also a disturbing feeling. You constantly feel tempted to break away and assert your will. And I think this struggle is a recurring, unspoken anxiety with AI. And feeling this viscerally in your body can actually be very healing and clarifying. So unlearning language and Voice in My Head are both reflecting on AI, and they also use new machine learning tools. Blind Self-Portrait is about AI without using anything new and fancy. But another strategy is to just use AI as a tool. Remember, before machine learning was used for image generation and text generation, it was used for image analysis. And it's still useful for analysis like classification and similarity estimation. And it can serve as an important tool in cultural heritage work, for example. So this is a project I worked on with Golan Levin and a few other collaborators. We analyzed the work of Teenie Harris, a newspaper photographer from Pittsburgh, who documented his community from the 1930s through the 1970s. The Carnegie Museum of Art calls his 70,000 photos one of the most detailed and intimate records of the Black urban experience known today. And we analyzed and sorted these photos in ways that are intuitive and playful for people who are newcomers to explore, and also helpful for curators and archivists who are working with Harris's images on a regular basis. Teenie Harris didn't keep notes, so there are a lot of questions about his photos. And one of our main efforts is helping archivists identify the people in these photos, many whom may still be living. Cross-referencing hundreds of thousands of faces is best accomplished with automatic face recognition. And when I've spent so much of my artistic practice warning of the dangers of face recognition, working with face recognition in this way can also feel really healing and refreshing. We explored a few different interface ideas for presenting these collections in intuitive ways, and this work is now accessible to the public at the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh. Machine learning can provide a perspective on large collections that's really different from the way a human might approach that archive. It can make them more accessible to new audiences. Analysis doesn't have to be limited to images, texts, or videos. We can use these techniques to analyze and sort sounds, too.
Welcome. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello there.
Hello.
This part's loud. I've even used these techniques to analyze humpback whale songs with composer Annie Lewandowski. We use the AI analysis to run the lighting design for a large installation that draws attention to the leftover fishing gear that is still killing hundreds of thousands of whales every year. Another strategy for working with AI is to just manifest the future so that we can kind of collectively gain experience in the present. This is VibeCheck, another installation I built with Lauren. We deployed 10 cameras throughout a gallery, tracking how people feel based on their face expressions. And then we guess who it is that is making people feel that way, based on who's close to them. And then we display those people on a leaderboard. So we kind of imagine a world where the same kind of community policing that we do online manifests in real spaces, and by actually building it out, we give the audience a chance to build intuition and reflect on what the future would feel like in that world. And Lauren and I like to really build these things for real. We like to build experiences that aren't just like imitations or imaginary scenarios. We actually build the software out. This system, is running real face recognition, real face expression classification, and everything. And when we build these systems, it also helps us build insight about the challenges of how these systems are built, and it also informs our perspective on how to most effectively critique these systems. One final strategy is to just flip the power dynamic, and hopefully you can democratize the means of resistance against AI. So as an individual creative person, I promise you cannot invent something that will fundamentally disrupt power, because power will eventually appropriate your clever intervention and turn it into a funny face filter. But I see hope in the possibility of spreading resistance more broadly. And this project, Facework, it's a game that gives players a chance to interrogate face analysis directly. So typically, when a surveillance system makes judgments about you, it happens behind the scenes. You never get to engage with it in real time. And I think it's only when you can have a real-time relationship with these technologies that you can build intuition for them. So I built a face attribute classification tool from scratch using popular face analysis algorithms and data sets, and I ask players to fool it with real-time feedback. This takes place in the context of a kind of imaginary gig worker app where you have to perform a face in order to get a job. Okay, in closing, I'd like you to walk away from this talk just knowing that art has a lot more to offer beyond the automation of skilled creative labor provided by generative tools. Try to put the tools to use solving genuinely tricky problems. Try working with archivists and curators, manifest the future and see how it feels, or democratize these new intuitions, or just ignore all of it and make something about AI without using any new tech at all. Thank you. Kiitos.
Thank you, Kyle. And again, if you have comments or questions for Kyle, please send them in via the online platform, and I will bring them to him when we bring him back to the stage. And next, we will have Hannu Toivonen. Welcome, Hannu. Hannu is Professor of Computer Science at the University of Helsinki.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here. I'm not from LA, I'm from Porvoo, but I also live by the river. I'll tell you briefly about computational creativity, if and how computers could be creative, what that might mean, and some examples. The idea of creative machines is very, very old. We know from 1,000 years ago already of an algorithm for turning a poem into music, not really playing it out. But here's an example from the 50s, early 50s. Alan Turing, the father of computer science, he and his team, they already had the idea of using computers to do something creative. So let me play you a short piece of music their system produced. So we can discuss whether the piece was creative or not, but for me as a computer scientist, what's more interesting is if the system, if the program was creative or not. We may often think of computers as monkeys typing more or less randomly. I could have replaced the image with a parrot because, as you know, language models are often called stochastic parrots, not really knowing what they are doing, but by chance they might produce something that appears to be creative. But that's not the whole picture. We can build computer programs that can be creative. Let me give you a very simple example from a month ago. This makes sense for people from around Helsinki. I was in Viikki, at the Viikki campus of the University of Helsinki. I needed to come back here to downtown. So I used the Helsinki Region Traffic Journey Planner for finding a route. The obvious route is to take the road that directly comes from Viikki to Helsinki, and there are buses every couple of minutes. But the route suggestions I got from the journey planner were via Oulunkylä or Itäkeskus. Anybody who knows the geography of Helsinki knows that makes no sense, except that it makes a lot because there's this new tram line. But this was a creative act. It was novel to me. It was very much fit for the purpose of getting to Helsinki fast. It was made with intention, not by some random process. Of course, we can ask if the system itself knew it was creative or was trying to create something novel. It wasn't, obviously. But computers can be creative. Margaret Boden has suggested 3 different ways of building processes that can be creative. You can, for instance, build a system, a program that combines existing ideas to produce new ones. That's apparently what most of human creativity is about, combining something that is familiar already, but the combination is not. But then you can also make a system systematically explore the space of concepts, ideas, or routes, and then maybe you find something that is novel and appropriate. Or in the most interesting case, you build a system that is able to transform its own space, and then it might be able to find something even more novel. We can still ask, I'm not going into there today, about whether the systems are intentional. Do they have the intention to create something? Are they, in some sense, aware of what they are creating? Can they assess their products? Can they adjust their own behavior, and so on? If so, they might be more creative than systems that do not. Let me give you a couple of examples. The 2 first ones are from the past of what we've done in my research group when we started to work on computational creativity some 12 years ago. My own background is in computer science, data mining, data science, data analysis. And this example project here is from sleep analysis. I had a PhD student in a startup, and they were developing this sleep analysis device, which produces data from the tiny movements that your body makes when you are lying still, fast asleep. And with some data analysis, you can then extract information about heart rate, respiration rate, and so on. And then you can do sleep analysis, figure out the different stages of sleep during the night. And then here comes the computational creativity part. We build a system that composes a novel piece of music to reflect the sleep during the night. So it compresses 8 hours into 2 minutes of piano music. So here's an example. So in the morning when you wake up, you can listen to your sleep as music, getting an idea of how you slept. The overall idea here is to improve your well-being by making it easier, more attractive to track your own sleep, and then maybe change your sleeping habits to improve your well-being. This is from A Night Well Slept. Let me give you a different example. So here the intent is really to make the music somehow intuitively match the kind of sleep you had. REM music would be lively, deep sleep would be slow, peaceful, calm. Let me give you one more example here. Here the person falls asleep. Okay, you get the idea. Let's move forward. Here's another example. One of the early things we did in my group was to develop a system for writing poems. And first, the system was fully autonomous, just producing a poem from a topic the user gave. But then we figured out it would be much more interesting to actually give the user some ways of interacting with that. And we were doing research in the school context in 2012, where pupils could write poetry with the help of an AI system. The idea was to help elementary school students to learn language, play with language, and help them learn about things. This image here is from a new version of that tool from 2022 from the Heureka Science Center, where we built together with the Science Center the system around an old typewriter where the user can, with very minimal, very simple elementary interaction, instruct or guide the system towards something they like. So here we wanted to add interaction to give the user the opportunity to feel they are creating something of their own. In the case of the sleep musicalization, it was the user's sleep data, something very personal, intimate perhaps, to produce music, which again was a way of trying to make some sense of the creative, or make use of the creativity abilities of programs for the user, not just having programs do something by themselves. As a third example, fast forward to today, and Midjourney image generation program, which now gives anyone here the ability to produce beautiful images based on textual prompts. By trial and error, you can produce amazing images. And while this is maybe often undervalued as something kind of cheap, it's too easy. I think it's really great in terms of giving anyone the power of being creative with the help of AI. So, to conclude, we often use AI to make things more efficient, being more productive, and it ends up giving us stress. So my vision is that we should make use of AI for creativity, giving us joy and improving our well-being, doing things just for the fun of doing it, without thinking of whether it's efficient or productive. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannu. And again, we'll have the questions to Hannu via the platform. And next we have our last speaker, Tomi Slotte-Duva, come on stage. Welcome, Tomi. And Tomi is senior lecturer at Aalto University.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm not from the LA River. I live in Turku, so I guess I'm close to Aura River, if we sort of define us by that sense. So, yeah, just make it short. I think I'm just going to talk a little bit about computers and art, and computers creating art and this kind of stuff. And we can just start from the deep end and make it short. Can computers create art? No. Thank you. Well, at least never has any of my computers made any art, and I have had computers for over 40 years. But as you can probably guess, there is a but to this question, or there is actually many buts to this question. First one is that you can, of course, use computers to create art. And maybe more importantly, art made with the help of computers can make visible or be a form of art that would be difficult to know otherwise. Just think of any sort of artistic medium. Film creates something that painting can't, sculpture something that dance can't, and so on and so on. But what do we then mean with something being art? What actually is art? How do we define art? And in order to understand can computers actually create art, we need to have some idea what art is. What are we talking about? But yeah, what is it? There are, of course, sort of lots of different definitions of art. Some of the traditional ones concentrate on different sort of focal points of art. For instance, institutional suggest that art is something that one can find in museums or galleries, or sort of intentional definition thinks that it is art if it's only made something that artist has intentionally made to be art. And then this kind of author-oriented thinks that art is anything, everything, and everything made by an established artist, including artists' notebooks, clothes, houses, and so on and so on and so on. And the last one, sort of a traditional one, is aesthetic, that art is something that corresponds to the prevailing aesthetical norms of the society or something, like something that is beautiful. Art is something that looks like Mona Lisa. Art is something that's like Black Square or something. Another, and maybe more current look at the art is the notion that art is not equal to the artwork, be it a painting, sculpture, or piece of code. In short, art is a process. However, it's not that simple. As with all definitions, the discourse of art as process is quite diverse. Here are just some sort of examples. For instance, philosopher Alvano sees art as an essential human action that is, along with philosophy, the most important aspect of being human. In short, art is what makes us evolve. It disrupts this kind of habitual, organized lives and makes us anew. Bit similarly, art historian and anthropologist Ellen Disseinacker asserts that art is something that transforms the ordinary into extraordinary. Art, along with the rituals and play, is crucial to who we are as species. Moving into more post-human layers, Emily Hood and Tyson Lewis contend that actually art is much more entangled, involved, and messy process, where necessarily it's not just humans making art, but the material has agencies as well. We as humans are not making art, we are making art with something. Maybe here we can resurface back to the computers making art. If we humans are not the sole makers of art, if the material, the sort of a more than human agency over art making, can computers then create art? For instance, we could ask how much does a Photoshop create our art for us? How much does it sort of drive us into some direction or so on? The problem space around art and technology is quite complex, and in general we could say that technology shares a quite long history with art making. Noe, for instance, argues that painting, like many others, that painting is a technology requiring the knowledge of and skills of making and using brushes, paints, and techniques. In a similar way, art historian and researcher Edward Sanken maintains that, for example, perspective, at least sort of a Western perspective, is a technology similar to software. Both have their executable rules, create visible results, but are abstract and invisible in the sort of artwork. However, for now and for much of at least contemporary Western art, technology in itself cannot create art. Instead, art challenges, questions technology in some way. Art uses technology not as in awe of technology's grand accomplishments, but more from the point of irony or this kind of a questioning or discourse. At least from the point of technology, that seeing technology only sort of another tool in the artist's repertoire. Moreover, there are many sort of noteworthy arguments presenting a case that digital technology, apart from other technologies, is more than sort of these other technologies, that it has more agency, more capabilities than any other previous technology. And I think I agree with many of those comments that digital technology and the way the digital entangles with many other sort of human and non-human processes and structures, and in the scale and speed that is quite overwhelming, does bring forth a new kind of agency that is also applicable to art. However, these digital assemblages also include more than enough challenges and issues that are either unprecedented or happen on a scale that is hard to grasp, in which we don't have time to go here, but I see sort of a responsibility to just name a few. Question of who gets to develop digital technology and whom is it for is still a big one. Regarding AI, in particular, the question of the use of natural resources and remaking and abusing, for instance, colonial power is another. And concerning AI and visual culture, there is an ongoing discourse on the value, representation, and power of images and narrative. However, to end, I want to focus on one intriguing aspect of computers and computer-generated art, and that is something we could call the Umwelt of computers. The word Umwelt originates from the early 20th century German biologist Jacob von Uexküll and can be literally translated as environment or surroundings. But being a German word, it means a lot more than that. And I think presentation without a German word would be no presentation at all. Umwelt of computers can be, for instance, understood as an opposite to a computer's user's environment, be it an artist, researcher, or scientist comprehension of the computer. And this is something that Uexküll calls Umgebung, like how we treat the computers and so on. It's not our environment and so on. So Umwelt focuses on the computer's environment, to the way computer recognizes and can act in their environment or surroundings. British artist and author James Bridle has used the concept of Umwelt when thinking about computer-based intelligences. He wants to open the computer intelligence to appreciate another kinds of intelligences, which we have for long downplayed, such as the intelligences around other species, and even intelligences in plants and trees. From that kind of position, computer intelligence becomes not only a question of efficiency, cost savings, or innovation, but becoming with something, appreciating that computers, as they are, not magical entities, but technological tools tied into massive human and non-human assemblages. I see Umwelt as a word that could bring us closer to the technologies available today and to a position that could be more fruitful. Instead of thinking about artificial intelligence or generative AI or human-like digital behaviors, we could try to abandon our human-centered position and think what kind of environments computers situate in. To conclude and put it in another way, we could ask that what would computer art made by computers for computers be like? Would we understand it? Would we see it? Would we even care about it? Thank you.
Thank you, Tomi. Please sit down, and Kyle and Hannu, please join me back here on the stage for a discussion. I'd like to continue from what Tomi was talking about, what is art, because earlier I was looking at the comments that this event got on Facebook, and the title particularly, and almost all of the comments were around the question of what is art. Not so much about how to use AI to create art, but the question of can computers create art. So let's start. Kyle, how do you define art? What is art to you?
Oof, I mean, I thought your coverage of the main definitions was pretty great. I really connect with the institutional definition because that's one way that I can actually convince myself that I'm an artist. If the work is shown and other people call it art, then it's easy. I can rest at night and say, okay, I'm an artist. But also, I think for me, what I care about in art is often about connecting with another human, someone who put their blood and sweat and feeling into, the work that they're making, and to see myself in that person overcoming their limitations and creating something incredible, which maybe is part of the aesthetics of art, but I actually don't know where that fits exactly into those categories. So I think AI, computers, they can do a lot of those things that art is by many definitions, but I don't know that they will get to that place of being another person. They'll never be another human. Maybe one day they'll be another person. I don't know.
Hannu, what is art to you?
I think I'll keep trying to define what art is, but I'd like to maybe mention here that it's good to keep three concepts that are closely related separate. One is generation. That's a technical term. The computer programs we are now talking about, language models, image generation, and so on. There's no question they generate something. The next concept is creativity, whether it's creative or not, and not all the content they generate is creative. And I believe creativity is very much a subjective thing, so it's personal opinion on whether something generated by a computer, for instance, is novel and interesting for me personally. And then art, I guess, is again something very different, has to do more maybe with the culture and the society. For instance, the different aspects, who accepts something as art or not. And maybe sometimes in the discussion, these three concepts might be confused.
I'd like to read a few comments that people have posted in advance and hear what you think. These were in response to the short post that had the "Can computers create art?" headline. The process of creating art has traditionally been a dialogue that takes place inside a human mind. The most important building blocks of it are emotions. Machines do not have real emotions. Is there really any more value than aesthetic in AI art, because art in general is basically a channel to express human emotions and views? It's a vivid and subtle dialogue between two humans. There is no authentic feeling in AI-generated art. No emotion, no pain, no joy, no sorrow, no ecstasy, no agony, just hollow technicality. A third one, emotions are a part, sensual experience is another, then insight, human interpretation. Why human? Because the role of art being a sort of communication, sharing between people If there's a need for a single word, I'd say the most important building blocks are experiences. Machine learning models are not capable of that. And the final one, could AI surpass humans as artists in the future? No, since an artist expresses something about the human experience, i.e. experiences a machine can never have. The machine cannot express anything meaningful in an emotional sense, just to mix up plagiarized patterns and symbols. So I'm interpreting this being an idea that AI would create something, but these are focused on emotions, experience, very human approach. What do you think? Do you believe that AI could not produce something that would express our emotions or experiences, or that would inherently communicate to us? Tommy.
Yeah, I think there's this kind of a difficulty with the wording of AI, and I think there's been some sort of a discussion that AI is a word from the 1950s, if I'm correct, and there was also discussions about should we use this kind of a terms of cybernetics or something like that. And maybe if we could have used something else, we wouldn't have these kind of questions, because artificial intelligence sort of automatically in our brains, we start to think about something like human-like, that has, like Hannu was saying, this kind of a concepts, and or the sort of a concepts gets mixed up in some way, that we are thinking about intelligence of sort of a conscious being, and these technologies are not conscious, and there isn't any sign that they would be conscious. So I think in that sense, it's not sort of a, the question is wrong if we say it in that way, but I also think that art is this kind of it's embodied. It's not only in mind, but it's embodied, and it's a process. It's a sort of activity, and in that sense, yeah, I don't know if it can we see activity in the machines, but at least we can sort of conclude that they are not conscious in some way and cannot create awareness and art then in the same way.
But in a way, if we think of AI models, I was trying to think of this myself, that if you have a human who prompts the model, then a human is already there. It is a human who's curating and helping. But what if you had an AI model that was instructing another AI model, and they would do the curating? But in a way, they're all trained with our human experiences, so wouldn't it still be a human endeavor? What do you think, Hannu?
Right, that's an interesting idea, and things like this have been done a lot in the field of computational creativity I was talking about. So having one system produce something and another one being the judge, or using two systems trained on different data sets, one for generating something and the other trying to select pieces that are somehow novel or unexpected. So there are many ways of using AI and software for doing things beyond producing the average by machine learning. But yes, the question is, in the end, if we talk about art, many of the comments resonate with me. And if we define art by it being somehow connecting people, humans like Kyle, for instance, here said, then by definition, content produced solely by computers doesn't have that. And that's why to me, it's so much more interesting to think of ways in which humans and computers can collaborate to produce something. Then there is the human element, and it makes much more sense for the person creating the work or using the computers, as well as maybe for the audience.
So Kyle, if you think of your work in a voice, that was also, people got to experience it here. It basically, the AI does create your inner voice back to you, and in a way impacts your emotions. But how do you see that as, is it AI creating art and emotions, or is that you behind the scenes?
Yeah, well, the piece would never exist if we didn't create it. I mean, we still had to make it as artists. So I think maybe the really important things that are missing from purely AI-generated art are things like agency and motivation. And when you have multiple AIs interacting with each other, there's some feeling, like a glimmer of those important features. They start to appear, but it's different. I think when, like, some of what we're looking for when we're looking for art made by a person is we're looking for that person to have an experience of the world, a reason for being in the world, like some, trials and some successes. And we don't see that with AI right now. AI does what we tell it to when we tell it to, and it doesn't have any of its own motivations or agency. Some people are exploring with large language model agents right now that have more of an ability to use tools and kind of organize and plan. And if you watch these agents plan out something and do it, it can start to feel a little weird, like maybe there's more of a person here than you were used to before. But I think until we have more of those things we associate with personhood in these AI agents, then we're not going to feel like any of this is the kind of art that we care about.
So I guess there's partly a question of the artist using AI,
Yeah.
how does it impact their work? And then there's the question of the recipient, how do they think of the work or experience it knowing that AI has been involved? How do you, Kyle, balance the use of AI and your own input in the work? How do you think about it?
Yeah, my work's quite process-oriented, so I'm generally exploring what you can do with a new tool, or sometimes I'll start with a difficult, social or technical question and try to unravel it, one step at a time. And I'm not usually just sitting down with an image generator or a text generator and just making a new image or a new prose or something like that. So I think my process is maybe a little different from a lot of people who are using new generative AI tools. For me, AI is much more of, it can be a tool for solving a problem. It can be a tool for asking questions about what it means to be human. It's not so much a tool for reproducing kind of culturally legible aesthetics. And I think when you were talking about creativity, AI as a tool that helps us be creative, I think I would rephrase that a little bit and say we are already creative, but AI is a tool for helping us become culturally legible. I can draw a stick figure, and it's very creative, but not everyone appreciates a stick figure. And when I see it, I don't feel creative. But when I see it turned into a beautiful painting, suddenly now I feel creative because we have a certain idea of what creativity should look like. So, sorry, I got a little off track there.
What do you think, Hannu, of that, how we can use this to enhance our creativity or make us feel more creative?
Yeah, that's exactly the point, and Carl put it nicely. We are so creative in so many ways. Creativity, obviously, is not a binary feature. It's not like you either are not or you are creative, but we are all creative in many ways. And I think the great potential in many AI systems now is that they can help us being more creative in more ways than we can be otherwise. We can create things we never could imagine we could do. We can create things we couldn't imagine. And I think I'm so surprised that it's not used more in the society nowadays than it is. Or when it is, we feel it's being used too much. We get all the crap in social media. But I think there's a lot of potential in helping us just enjoying life more. I'm not thinking of creative professionals. They might benefit from that as well. I don't know. But just for us ordinary Joes, I think it's really, really great what we can do with these tools.
Tommy, how do you think artists can benefit from AI?
Yeah, I think what Hannu and Kyle was saying is quite sort of apt, that using it as a tool, and it can sort of surface these kind of things that would be very hard to do otherwise in these kind of things, and bring these kind of experiences that would be hard to do otherwise. And also sort of sidetracking, thinking that the more I see AI-generated images, the more I sort of respect stick figures drawn by people. And so maybe that's also this kind of a feature that our sort of a visual culture gets we sort of train ourselves to do more with our sort of hands and so on, because For me, they are seeing more and more like Microsoft clip art in some sense. But there's, of course, this kind of differences.
Well, this is a perfect segue to another question I had. Do you think that using AI is going to impact how we value art? Are we, in fact, going to start valuing more art that is made by hand, stick figures, rather than something that has used computers? And I want to, again, quote a few comments. One, it's not really a matter of can computers create art, but rather, do we want computers to generate art instead of actually putting the time and effort into the actual creative process? And then there was another quote, why would I bother looking at something that someone didn't bother to make? So are we as recipients going to think differently depending on whether the artist did it by hand and whether they used computers? What do you think?
I mean, I'll give an example from the piece I was speaking about, Voice in My Head, which is currently being shown just around the corner. So the script that we wrote for it is a kind of generative script. We went line by line and said, here are some kind of points that we want you to hit as an AI, and can you please cause the conversation to flow around this in a way that feels natural and hits all of these points. So kind of keep control over things, but do this broad outline. So in a way, we didn't really write what the AI says. The AI kind of has its own opinions about how it should say things, and we have our opinions about how it should say things. It's a lot more like working with an improvisational actor or improvisational dancer. And when you do that, you don't sit back and say, oh, well, that wasn't composed or that wasn't written, right? You say, oh, this is a performance and it involves some element of, complex real-time chaos, and that's interesting. And with a human dancer, or a human performer, you're excited because there's a person on stage that you're watching. And in this context, I think there's a different kind of excitement, which is a sort of personalization and the knowledge that you're experiencing something that was just meant for you. So these generative systems can open up new possibilities. And I think that's maybe a more fruitful place to explore rather than just trying to repeat old aesthetics.
What do you think, Hannu?
I think it's obvious that the value of content that's being produced without much effort will be lower than the value of identical content that has been produced with more effort. We see it, don't we, already? Take a painting or a high-quality photo of the painting. You have the exact same image, but the painting made by hand, it's much more valuable, much more valued for good reasons than a photo, a poster made of that. I think the same holds here as well. If you produce content by the click of the button, you don't feel the value yourself. You might feel the value in a picture you produce with the help of Midjourney after you've spent hours and hours on it, even though in the end it's computer generated. But you put your effort, your vision, your creation and so on into the process. And then I guess it's similar for the audience. If they understand that effort went into the process, they appreciate it more. In my field of computational creativity, we've seen that often that computer-generated content is not valued as much as human-generated. And then sometimes it turns out that if you explain the complexity of the program and the steps of the process, the decisions that are made within the system, then the audience might appreciate it more when they see it's not just some random outcome.
Yeah, we need the pain.
Right. Yeah.
Tommi, I found it interesting when you were thinking of if computer would create art for a computer, and you said something along the lines, would we even understand it? But I'm not an artist myself, and often when I very much enjoy experiencing art, but often I don't understand any of it. But it still happens, I guess, in me, in the recipient, whether I have no idea what the artist wanted, I don't have an idea of the art history, but I still might feel like it's art if it evokes something in me. Do you think that computer-generated art could evoke the same emotional reactions as other art? Or, like you're saying, is it that we probably just wouldn't understand even what AI is getting at? And does it matter if we understand what it's getting at?
Yeah, I don't know if it does matter. I think we are quite capable as human beings to sort of appreciate anything and think about stuff that comes to us, and sort of it can sort of spike something in us, so be it sort of human-made or not. And I think there's some studies that there was sort of music, AI-generated music, that if the listener weren't told that it's AI-generated, they appreciated it more and could see and sort of describe a lot of feelings in it. But then when they knew, they said, no, it lacks all the feelings. But I think there's also, there has been at least one sort of artistic project that was, I think, led by Piritta Puhto, that's called The New Artist, and it's also already in the from 20 years old project maybe, that they try to generate that, think about if computers created art, what kind of art they could create, and they had this small video of some kind of robots doing robot things, and it was quite sort of fascinating in a sense that you really didn't get what's happening. But of course, it was human-made art, but just taught in that sense. So yeah, but I think there's always this kind of our human-centered sort of a view, of course, that what would it be? But maybe there would be this kind of why would computer aesthetics or computer art be anything like if there would be this kind of supercomputer entities or something? What would they create? I don't know. Something completely different. That's a weird idea to think about.
Well, we have an audience question here that also touches on something I was thinking of AI and resistance, which Kyle was sort of referring to as well. But this one is directed now to Hannu. Hannu, in a capitalist system, how can we support that creative AI is used toward increasing well-being rather than increasing stress by automating parts of what is core to our human self-realization?
I think there are lots of tools that we can use without too much money, without acting against any intellectual property rights and so on, if that was the point of the question. At the same time, we of course know that much of the not art, but the content we see and produce in the net, in social media, and so on, is being selected, nowadays even produced more and more for financial reasons and for earning money. But I think on an individual level, we can all see to using tools that make us feel more creative, make us get more joy out of creativity. I'm not sure if I was addressing the question here, but...
So I wanted to continue, Kyle, because you were saying that in the end, whatever you create, it will be made into a funny meme or social media tool or something. How do you think of artistic resistance in the age of AI? Also, in Tommy's definitions, there was that art is, it changes the way we view the world, or it changes things or challenges things. Is this possible with AI, or are we always going to be slaves to the tech companies that created it and put in the limitations of the data and what it can do?
Yeah, I'm a really big fan of, like I said, kind of democratizing the means of resistance and not expecting as an individual that you can like fight the man or take down power or something. I think that we all have to work together. Like that's the only effective way of actually organizing. I want to give a shout out to the demonstrators across the street. We're working together right now. I think with AI, some of the things we need to figure out are still connected to surveillance. They're connected to exploitation of copyrighted media, like text and images that were never licensed for training, but are still being used for training regardless. There are both ethical and legal parts of that question, and the legal parts really vary from region to region, and they're still being disputed right now. But the more that we can kind of organize together to kind of get our head and heart right, and then fight for the perspective that we believe in, like that can actually make a difference. And I think that with new kinds of regulations, new kinds of like collective organizing, that we can, usher in the kinds of technical changes that lead to the social changes that we want. I don't think any of us are going to make like one tool that solves any of these issues, or even one artwork that like changes everybody's mind. But I think if we work together, then we can actually make a difference.
We have an audience question related to this as well. Could an AI with agency, motivation, independence, and radical out-of-the-box creativity be trained? If yes, with what type of training material? Let's start with Hannu. How to create radical out-of-the-box creativity in AI.
Right. The first answer might be that you might do something else than machine learning. Machine learning by construction is imitation, and it can be difficult to learn to break out of the box. So instead, you can use many other techniques for that, using systems that, for instance, systematically search through some search space you've defined, and then maybe using machine learning to test if you are within the box or not. If you are in the box, then reject that idea and only use those that are outside. Maybe use some other machine learning components to somehow assess the quality of those ideas or concepts and keep the better ones. So that might be one way of trying to escape the inherent problem in machine learning, that it's essentially imitation.
What do you think, Tomi?
Yeah, I think in similar way that the AI that we are probably talking now, this kind of generative AI, it's just statistics, and it's data that we have been collected, and it's sort of in so many ways biased data, and then the data is processed, and then there's lots of different things have been taken away. That's of course good for us, like violent stuff or this kind of child porn things, but then also there's a lot of sort of that's on the sort of edges, on the fringes, this kind of, for instance, like queer imagery, queer text, and so on, are all also being sort of taken away. So the sort of the whole idea of creating something radical from data that we have already been collected is sort of quite hard, because it's already in the past in some sense. So, like Hannu said, maybe using some other systems, like I think in art there has been for ages different kind of systems to think differently or break out the box, like Situationist had this kind of different kind of scores that you could try to use and come up with new radical ideas. So maybe you can create something like that with the help of these systems.
What do you think, Kyle? How would you train radical out-of-box thinking?
I feel like, I don't know that I have a great answer to training radical systems, but I think an adjacent question is just, how do you get these systems to generate the things that they're not designed to generate in the first place? And if you look into the like the jailbreaking scene for ChatGPT, it's super interesting. You know, ChatGPT is designed to only say certain things. Like if you ask it for how to make a bomb, it won't tell you. It'll say, you know, I'm not comfortable talking about that. But you can get it to tell you how to make a bomb if you ask the right way. And it's a really interesting exercise to figure out how to work around these kinds of restrictions that have been put in place, because in working around those restrictions, you learn about how these companies implemented those restrictions and what the extent of those restrictions are. So I don't know how to train from scratch a system that would do this, but I think if you try to get the existing systems to do it, you'll learn a lot about why they were made that way and how.
Then there's a practical question. What are your favorite resources to look into if one wants to learn more about AI and art, art about AI, art using AI? Any suggestions?
It used to be Twitter, but then Elon Musk bought it. So I guess I'm just following my friends on Instagram and watching them for updates. I've been watching Sugwen Chung, who's doing great work with robotics, Mario Klingemann, a German artist who's been doing a lot of generative AI imagery, very low-level programming, Madeline Gannon, who's been also working with big robot arms. I'm thinking about like Maya Mann, who's making these really like ugly collectible dolls that are sort of commenting on femininity and like idealized bodies and pop culture. I'm thinking about Lauren Lee McCarthy, who I worked with on this project. So I'd start by looking at some of their work and then seeing who else they're influenced by and following. Yeah, there's a big network of people, but I don't know that there's any one place to look right now.
Yeah, probably not. I think there was, I think, at least 2 years ago, AIartist.org, that had this kind of a presentation of different artists and techniques, and also a lot of these kind of open questions that they wanted to create. Another sort of interesting side is this kind of intersectional AI toolkit that's tries to think about what would be intersectional AI, and they also sort of include artists and researchers. I think those are at least some, and of course there's been a lot of written about AI art, like Lev Manowitz, of course. I have written about it, articles, go and read them, and many others like there. So there's some kind of resources, and of course it goes much sort of way back if we think about sort of the whole history of AI and so on. So there's a lot of this kind of historical context as well.
I'll actually add one more note, which is that sometimes the tools will have their own communities around them, and you can connect with other people who create with those tools. So like the Comfy UI community is really big, and there's a lot of people making weird generative images and videos using that tool. And the same thing for like the Midjourney scene, like those people are doing everything you can imagine and having, you know, some pretty deep discussions about it too. So that could be a good place to look.
Yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
And some of my students have all been using still this kind of a little bit older AI tool called Art Blender and mixing it with other sort of techniques, and they really sort of like it because it gives different kind of aesthetics to the current models in some way.
Where would you go to, Hannu?
Lots of good pointers here. I should make notes and check them out. If you are interested in the history of this kind of art in Finland, then there's a fresh book, Suomalaisen mediataiteen ensimmäinen vuosista, the first century of Finnish media art. So you can look that up to see what's been done in Finland.
What if I would ask ChatGPT to tell me everything about AI? Do you think it would give me good examples? It's maybe a little behind since it's not current always.
Yeah, I don't know. Should we ask it?
Yeah, I would ask. I would start there. Okay, well, you already mentioned several tools and communities around them, but so how do you predict AI will change the professional landscape for artists in the next decade? There's all these new tools coming out. You already mentioned Midjourney. There's many other ones. I personally don't know these, but I was told that there's Sora, Premiere Pro, HeyGen, 11 Labs. What do you think? What kinds of tools should artists learn to know, or what will be the most perhaps impactful?
Well, I think the most important thing is the sort of the livelihood of artists, that if we are sort of because of the generation is so easy. So already lots of sort of magazines and websites are using generated images instead of hiring a photographer or artist or so on. So I think that's the sort of most pressing sort of thing for artists. But I think that there are so many tools that if they are interesting for the artist, they should go and sort of try them, and in this kind of try them and like Kyle said, hack them and break them and make some mess with them. And I think that's the sort of interesting stuff.
What tools would you recommend, or how do you think artists will work?
I agree. Like the main issue is about artists' livelihood, people who are making illustration or stock photography. Like it's going to change in ways. Some ways that we can control and influence, but in a lot of ways that are harder to influence. So, try to figure out how to use the tools in your practice in a way that allows you to maybe transition into something new. Or, like for me, I had more of like a crisis in the 2000s when I started seeing my work and all my friends' work co-opted by advertising agencies and just replicated completely wholesale, just ripped off and reproduced. And I thought, wow, like how are we going to ever keep our jobs as artists if other people are just ripping us off all the time? And I realized the only answer was to continually reinvent ourselves and become the next thing, and in some ways become like the unpaid research and development department for the advertising industry. But in that process of like reinventing yourself continually, I've learned how to like focus in on what's important to me about being an artist, which is not about any individual aesthetic or even the craft of like visual reproduction or kind of sonic performance or something. It's a much more abstract thing that has to do with kind of being able to look into yourself, being able to look at society and say something interesting about it. And that will never be replaced by an AI. I'm going to make a very controversial claim here.
So we hope. Hannu, what do you think of tools and profession?
I don't know what tools the artist should use, but just any tools. And I love how some of them embrace modern technology and explore with it and take it onto the breaking point and see what happens then, because that opens, like Kyle is doing, for instance, that opens up lots of interesting questions about AI and humanity. And I'm a boring person. I will only use the tools for the purpose they were intended for. So I admire artists who actually do the opposite and break things to raise interesting questions and important questions.
Mika, final question will be, what ethical considerations do you think are most pressing for artists working with AI today? Somewhat related to that, we have an audience question here. How much energy does AI art consume? Should artists be thinking of the environment or other ethical questions rather than just embracing all of these and using it? How do you think of it?
I want to respond to the energy question because this is something I've looked into a bit. I started looking into, so I mentioned GPUs in my talk, graphics processing units. They use a lot of energy. If you have a desktop computer at home and then you stick a GPU in it, and you push it to full power, that's going to be like 5 to 10 times more energy than the computer was using before. So it's a lot of energy. However, the reason that I got into understanding energy in the first place was because of something that happened before the generative AI boom, which was the NFT bubble. And there was a blockchain that was called Ethereum. It's still around, but maybe a little less popular. And it was also using GPUs. The way that it worked is that it was running GPUs full speed, doing nothing but generating random numbers, basically, all over the world. And at the time, it was a very large amount of energy. So just to put this in perspective, if you look at like Midjourney today, and you count up all the servers that they have and all the GPUs they have, it's somewhere on the order of tens of thousands of GPUs. And each one of these, you know, it's like I was saying, it's 5, 10 times more than what your computer at home is using. So that's a lot of energy, right? Well, when you look at Ethereum, it was about 10 million GPUs. And a lot of those GPUs are now being kind of repurposed, put into AI image servers, and some of them are being recycled, some of them are being thrown out. There's a big e-waste problem from it. So this isn't to give AI a pass, it's just to say that actually there are some really bad uses of energy right now, and I don't think that AI art's towards the top of it. Probably Bitcoin would be at the top at the moment.
Hannu, what do you think of ethical questions for artists using AI?
Well, one of the obvious ethical questions is IP rights. So is it okay to use systems that have been trained on images produced by artists without their consent? What are the risks if you do that the system produces something that is plagiarized from an original work and so on? So I think these are the immediate questions, and they are very complex and haven't been settled. So it still remains to be seen what happens in that front. Will we get any clear rules on how these systems can be trained? Will there be any compensation for the original artist and so on?
Here I will insert a little advertisement, because the last event in this series was about AI and copyright, and we focused exactly on that question, and that I think it can still be found on Aalto University's YouTube channel. Tomi, what are the pressing ethical questions?
Yeah, I was thinking that, of course, it's essential for artists to be critical about any tool they use, and I think artists naturally are quite sort of aware and critical about them. But yeah, I would say natural resources is one big sort of a big one. I think there's a very nice book by Kate Crawford named Atlas of AI, where she goes through the whole this kind of process, that what does AI actually need in its whole sort of a life cycle. And I think the sort of a use of natural sort of resources like energy is one of them, but then there's also this kind of quite sort of a mess of entangled social and political sort of structures, like where do you mine the sort of minerals for the graphic cards? That's one huge ethical problem right now. And of course the sort of whole e-waste and other is in the other end. And so this is the sort of, I think, one of the biggest. Then there's the sort of the issues of data, like the copyright, but also this kind of other kind of that. How do we use it? I think there's been some kind of research that when we think about these models, we think about them as some kind of a neutral, this kind of objective models we can ask something from, but they really aren't, that they are quite sort of a conservative in many ways, that the sort of answers they give and images they produce are quite conservative. So also this kind of ethical questions around that do we want to reproduce that, or do we sort of find ways to go around it and so on. So yeah, I think there's so many this kind of ethical questions, but I think, of course, they can be found in any kind of a technological sort of a medium we are using as well.
And perhaps this could be the topic of art for an artist to explore. Thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you for the audience here at Think Corner, and thank you for everyone on the stream. This series is now over for the spring, but next fall, AI-related topics and the series will continue at the Aalto University campus in Otaniemi, which will get its own brand new event space called Marsio. So we certainly hope that you will check that out in the fall, as well as coming here to Tiedekulma in the future. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you.